Breaking news. The Putin cult will only die if Russia is defeated militarily. Even though the Wagner uprising proved that the Russian people would not defend the regime, Vladimir Putin still enjoys almost divine status. The only way to end the spell is with a military victory. While pro-Kremlin Telegram channels have tried to spin Russian President Vladimir Putin's apparent bewilderment and helplessness in the face of the rebels as signs of strength and resilience, even they can't deny the surprise that Yevgeny Prigozhin's mercenary mutiny has caused. Even pro-regime Agency for Strategic Communications CEO Vadim Samotarev hailed it as a victory on the Nezygar channel. An independent military force easily seized control of 2 Russian regions and rapidly advanced towards Moscow, Samotarev wrote. He claimed that talks with the Kremlin's mediator, who happened to be the head of a neighboring state, Alexander Lukashenko, were the sole reason the Wagner PMC halted its march on June 24. The events have drawn attention to the systemic failure of the system and will have severe consequences for Russia's state, legal, and military apparatus. Pro-government journalist on the Telegram channel Dmitry Sevryukov made the observation that the radical changes proposed by the rebellion were not met with rejection by citizens or incite them to defend the established order from unexpected armed intruders. Sevryukov made a parallel between the current climate and the response of the population in 1991, when the Soviet regime was collapsing, but few were willing to resist that change. The uprising, according to independent political analysts, proved that Putin and his regime have no active supporters. Some may view this as good news for those advocating regime change in the Kremlin, since it disproves the official line that the Russian people are united behind their government. It's worth noting, though, that no cohesive opposition group emerged to capitalize on the unrest despite calls from various opposition leaders. The democratic opposition and nationalist groups failed to capitalize on the situation, and some self-proclaimed Kremlin opponents even backed the president. The remaining opposition figures in Russia are forced to make concessions to the Kremlin for their own safety, but it's clear that some of them sincerely believe that now is not the time for a rebellion. Many members of the opposition who have lived abroad for a long time still have the ingrained Russian tendency to revere the highest levels of authority and the state. Putin has been remarkably effective at encouraging this outlook. He has been in power for so long that the majority of people view him as infallible. This phenomenon has paradoxically backfired on him, as it has conditioned Russians to avoid politics for fear of jail time and to view those in power as a superior, godlike race. If authority is divine and transcends humanity, then regular people have little reason to guard it. Perhaps the lack of resistance to Prigozhin was attributable to the inculcation of passivity and learned helplessness. Putin's halo of sanctity prevents even the most egregious of his decisions from being questioned, let alone rebelled against. Independent sociologists from the Russian Field Group polled Russians in June, and their findings showed that 73% of respondents felt that Russia was heading in the right direction. 72% of those polled would back a peace treaty with Ukraine, while 64% would back a renewed attack on Kyiv. This tangle of competing viewpoints suggests the public at large would support a decision by the powers that be regarding military conflict. Putin's canonization has led to the delegation of absolute power over matters of life and death. But a glimmer of optimism can be seen. Vladimir Pastakov, a prominent Russian political scientist, argues that the end of Putin's reign will pave the way for a broader regime change because no immediate successor will enjoy the same level of sanctity as the current head of state. Prigozhin has been instrumental in demythologizing Putin in this respect. He not only let the world know how helpless the president was, but also publicly blamed him for starting and losing a pointless war. The leader of Wagner PMC unwittingly plotted a course for the ultimate military defeat of Putin's personality cult. It is now obvious that such a loss would lead to attacks on the Kremlin by radical patriots, who have the backing of a sizable and politically engaged minority. If the Kremlin wants to continue losing on the front lines, it needs to increase its military aid to Ukraine. This is important for Russia's future as well as that of Ukraine and its neighbors. Ksenia Kirilova is an expert on Russian culture, ideology, and diplomacy. She's written for the Atlantic Council, Stratfor, and the Jamestown Foundation, among others. CEPA's online journal, Europe's Edge, discusses pressing issues in European and North American foreign policy. Authors' views are their own and do not reflect those of their respective institutions or the Center for European Policy Analysis unless explicitly stated.